alluded to with Frodo and Sam earlier in the week, into the realm of the public square, right? Into the realm of the public square, that marketplace of ideas, public life, the spotlight, the limelight. And so this talk, no matter which aspect of public life you go into, I hope that this talk is edifying and will help to encourage and convict you along that way to that end. There are 7 principles in this talk. They're going to be illustrated in part by the life of William Wilberforce. Who can tell me about William Wilberforce? Who was William Wilberforce? Yeah, Ben.
He ended the English slave trade.
Yes, William Wilberforce. Yes, William Wilberforce is known, as Ben was saying correctly, as a member of Parliament, leading the fight over decades to abolish the slave trade in the British Empire. He lived in the late 1700s, early 1800s. That's when he served in Parliament. And as a member of British Parliament, this is when the British Empire, right, the sun didn't set on the British Empire. So abolishing the slave trade in the British Empire changed the world, right? Wilberforce, as Ben said, was also known for his very passionate, very serious Christian faith and how that animated his life and relationships. So about 15 years ago, there was a movie called Amazing Grace that was based on the biography of William Wilberforce, written by Eric Metaxas. Some of you have probably read the Bonhoeffer biography, or are still reading it since it's like 2,000 pages. We were talking about audiobooks, Mark, we were talking about audiobooks. My wife just finished the audiobook, and it was very impressive how quickly she got through it, because it's like 600 pages. It's a great biography. Metaxas also wrote Amazing Grace, the story of William Wilberforce. They made a movie in like 2006, 2007 about this. And I'm going to show you the trailer in case your life has not yet been illuminated by the example of the great William Wilberforce.
Amazing grace, how sweet.
What do you want with an old preacher?
I'm here to seek your advice. Like me.
Are you contemplating a life of solitude? People like you are too much. Besides, you have work to do.
But now I see.
No one of our age has ever taken power, which is why we're too young to realize that certain things are impossible. You're best to fight her in the house, and the best we can.
This little terrier Springfield.
I believe he's a Yorkshire Terrier. One man who will risk everything.
They were too kind.
Just letting you have what you want, Your Grace.
He fetched at least 25 guineas.
The game is over. To speak for those who could not.
We do this to let you know that you no longer belong to God, but to a man.
To make the blind see.
We have no evidence that the Africans themselves have any objection to the trade.
And to lead a movement that would change the world.
Do it. Pull the dirty, filthy ships out of the water.
The slave trade has 300 MPs in its pocket. It would be just you against them.
If we were to outlaw the trade tomorrow, it would bring financial disaster.
This enemy is my enemy. Wilberforce is a rebel.
How did you shout? You will not drown out the voice of the people!
No.
You still have passion. That matters more.
In Africa, I was a prince, in many ways not unlike you.
I'm going to try again. As your Prime Minister, I urge caution. And as my friend, not to hell with caution.
Remember, God made man equal. I once was blind, but now I see. Did I write that?
Yes, you did.
Now at last it's true.
Amazing Grace.
have seen Amazing Grace or read the book? Okay, pretty good. The rest of you have homework. So, it's perfect. No, Amazing Grace is a great film. There's a number of characters, a number of people that intersected life with William Wilberforce that we're going to get into because those friendships were so powerful. And it wasn't just William Wilberforce. There's an incredible community that formed there in London to do this good work. So, the topic is what a young conservative, what a young Christian should know when entering politics, what a young conservative should know when entering public life. We're going to go through 7 principles. They're going to start theoretical, they're going to get very practical, and they're going to be illustrated by the life and times of William Wilberforce and friends. Sound good? With me? Great. All right, so our first point is calling. Are there bad jobs? Right? So, our actions flow out of our beliefs. So we need to start with some beliefs in the way that we see our identity. Some people, some young people with good convictions worry, I shouldn't enter politics because it's such a morally compromised or dirty profession. Right? Just this week in Ohio, you see this huge scandal that's embroiled the state. 2 speakers of the House in a row now under FBI or who were under FBI scandal. You see this, you see the national news, you see the unrest, you see the tension, you see the turn on Twitter and you're not exactly encouraged for the human condition, right? Though you might chuckle a meme or two. And you think, man, this is a nasty profession. And look, there's truth to that, right? There's truth to the fact that politics and public life, and there's truth to the fact that there is a pressure that there might not be in other jobs, or at least the level is turned up. A pressure to compromise morally, a pressure to give in to the lust for power or the other types of lust, and all these things. There's a pressure to have the ends justify the means and replace perspective with the moment, right? So that's true. Justin and I had an early mentor in politics who was a state representative of Ohio, city councilman, who liked to say, he said, what I really love about politics is that I really get to know people. What I really hate about politics is that I really get to know people. Right? And it's true. Politics shows you the human condition laid bare. But the idea that, this is a dirty profession, it's such a morally compromised profession, therefore good people, people with goodwill or people of faith of any kind shouldn't get involved. They should stay away not to sully themselves. That's a flawed view of vocation. I think it's a flawed view of vocation because, think about it. Other than jobs that are illegal, directly illegal, or that directly exploit others, there's hardly any job or any profession that you can't serve in where you can honor your beliefs, serve your fellow man, woman, provide for your family, and do good for your community. In virtually every profession, why would politics be different? Right? So think about it. There are very few jobs, and there's probably a Netflix series about those jobs, Ozarks, right? Money laundering, there are very few jobs that are directly immoral, right? Most every profession is an opportunity. Through that profession, you can work hard, honestly, work to the glory of God, pursue excellence, provide a living for your family, love your neighbor, and do that. Politics included. William Wilberforce wrestled with this fact, though. He wrestled with the same quandary that some of you might have felt. Wilberforce, you have to know, grew up in a time in England a time in Europe, in the world, where the Enlightenment was raging, and for good and for some bad as well. And Wilberforce came from a family in British high society, and actual committed Christianity was really looked down upon as that's where you start seeing that's around the time you start seeing the term fundamentalist thrown around in a very pejorative way. Because this is what deism is the rage and the intellectually the intellectually popular thing at this time. So Wilberforce is kind of grown up in that environment. He spends, I think when he's 9 or 10, he spends a summer with his uncle and aunt up on the coast, and his parents find out that his aunt and uncle have become these embarrassing Christians, and they are hosting such people like George Whitefield, who would start the First Great Awakening, and John Newton, who we will come to talk about, and other internet pastors. They would host them in their home, and they're just becoming this massive embarrassment to the family who wants to maintain, high social order. So they bring him back because of the bad influence of these Christian aunt and uncle, because they think that he's going to make him into a fool. Well, thankfully for us, God did use his aunt and uncle in those early days, because when Wilberforce was in his mid-20s, like some of you, he's already elected to Parliament. He's this incredible orator. He's got this incredible gift for public speaking. He and William Pitt, who was played by Benedict Cumberbatch, are basically like the young studs in the British Parliament that are like the young up-and-coming parliamentarians and members of Parliament legislatures in British high society. And he's really living kind of a playboy life in London, he and his friends. They've got kind of the world at their footsteps, and they're living it up. You see the kind of the gambling game where the other member wanted to throw his slave in, and Wilberforce is already starting to have convictions about things like the slave trade and that, but he has these would further, because he has this kind of radical, or this, not radical, but this powerful conversion of Christianity. And again, in his circles, he didn't know many Christians, right? In terms of people who actually kind of had a relationship with God, or who were. So Wilberforce turns to the one person that he knows who has remained a mentor in his life, John Newton. John Newton, the old man in the movie, played by Albert Finney. John Newton. Anybody know who John Newton was? Yes? John Newton wrote Amazing Grace. Becca, do you know anything else about him? Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
Wasn't he like a slave trader and then also became a slave himself?
John Newton was a slave ship captain. He was a slave ship captain in the Atlantic, the horrible Atlantic slave trade. So John Newton does have a radical conversion of Christianity. Think this is like a human trafficker, right? This is like one of the guys in Taken becoming a pastor. This is what happens to John Newton. He becomes a pastor. He lives this monastic lifestyle as an Anglican priest. And Wilberforce knows him. And he also pens the words Amazing Grace. And then as it goes in his elder years, he becomes blind. I once was blind, but now I see. Takes on this whole other, kind of poetic meaning in his life and all of this. But he is Wilberforce's main mentor. Wilberforce goes to him and says, I've had this kind of awakening in my heart. I can't get God off my mind. I believe these things. I know Christ now. I have this relationship with God. So what do I do to become an Anglican priest? Because I have to now become a pastor or live a clergy lifestyle. And he's expecting Newton to say, yeah, that's what Christians do. Now you have to leave Parliament and all this. Newton excoriates him, the total opposite. Newton rebukes him, excoriates him, and says, no, God has given you this incredible talent and ability for the public square, for Parliament. This fight, this abolition of the slave trade is the fight of our age, and God has called you. It's so clear that he's put these skills, these gifts, and these convictions around you, and if you leave that, it won't be more holy, it will be desertion of God's calling on your life. So, take heart. Wilberforce struggles with that same thing if you're struggling with that. Now, I shared in our own life, but Justin and I, in my life, we had this friend that talked about what I love about politics, that I really get to know people. What I hate about politics, that I really get to know people. We'll get back to that in terms of some of the lessons that'll teach you, and how to keep your path straight on that. But the most important thing there is there are very few bad jobs, right? So I share this with you. I share this image, House of Cards, with you because that's what everybody's afraid politics is like, right? Frank Underwood, right? This is what everybody hopes politics is like, right? Now, look, most of us in this room probably have politics more similar to Ron Swanson than Leslie, right, who loves Joe Biden, which is hilarious now that he's the nominee, right? Even more so has, all these Democratic, big government heroes. But we can all agree, if you've seen Parks and Recreation, Leslie Knope has like the heart and the motivations that we wish our public servants had, right? She just loves her community, works tirelessly, can't imagine why people wouldn't want to love and do anything they could to better their hometown, right? So I tease a little bit with those. It's a mix in between. But look, why should you engage? Because Leslie Knope does have good motivations, right? We know good motivations aren't enough, but Leslie Knope has good motivations. So why should we engage? What should our motivation be for why we engage in the public square, for why you would engage in politics or public life? I would contend to you that our motivation should be based on the fact that when laws reflect what is good and true and just, human beings do better. Human beings thrive when laws reflect what is good and true and just, right? When truth, justice, and goodness resonate, people thrive. We see this throughout history. We see this, we don't even have to look to philosophy or theology for this. We see this lived out in our history books, right? When there are oppressive laws that undermine the dignity of human beings created in the image of God, people suffer, right? Look at Venezuela, look at the Soviet Union, under communism, look at these things. It's pretty objectively visible that when laws are corrupt and just, men, women, and children suffer more, and when laws reflect what is good, though it's not a utopia, it doesn't make life perfect, but people do better and live out of who they were created to be. So, love of neighbor is our motivation. Love of neighbor is our motivation. We are not seeking utopianism. We don't believe, as conservatives, we don't believe that utopia is possible this side of eternity, right? But as a Christian, Scripture tells me that I am to be a minister of reconciliation. So, it doesn't mean I think we're going to reconcile everything perfectly before Christ comes back, but it does believe that we are ministers of reconciliation. We're trying to bring reconciliation, healing, where we can, and good where we can. Preserve what is good. Romans 13 talks about obeying authority because God has put them in there for good reason. It talks about that when we look at the Bible, they talk about what makes a good ruler and what makes the bad or wicked ruler. We want to further that good. And in a constitutional republic, unlike 95% of the human beings who have lived in this world, who lived under regimes in which they could not affect the laws or affect their community on a macro level, we can. Like I said to you earlier in the week, this doesn't mean loving your neighbor actually means loving your neighbor, right? Now, it means helping your elderly neighbor with their groceries or something, or looking after them if they're out of town, looking after their house, whatever. It means loving your neighbor, right? But we are this small percentage of human beings that can actually love our neighbor on a macro level as well in our laws and in our society, in our community. In Jeremiah, in the book of Jeremiah, the Israelites are exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. And it says, Jeremiah 29, verses 4 through 7, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into Jerusalem that I've sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So, this is what God says to the Israelites, and we can apply that principle of seeking the good of the city in which we're in to our lives as well. The idea of seeking good, the idea of seeking what is moral, what is right. You've heard this from other speakers. You'll hear this on Saturday from Joseph back home. But it's often said when we're talking about motivations of why to engage, it's often conservatives, Christians, others right of center are often accused of wanting to force their beliefs upon people, right? But as one of our speakers earlier alluded to, all of politics is a process. Politics is a process of passing legislation, of wielding power, of these things. But the idea that all legislation, all of the things that we associate with politics, is a moral endeavor. They're moral questions. It's a moral deliberation is the word I'm looking for. Aristotle had the first definition of politics, one of the first good definitions of politics. Aristotle said that politics, basically, was people getting together and deciding how ought we order our lives together. Ought is a word we don't hear a lot anymore in modern parlance, but it is basically should. Yeah, it's basically should, right? How should we order our lives together? That's an essentially fundamentally moral question. So whether you're a very progressive Democrat or a very conservative Republican, every time you vote on a bill, you're trying to think, you would hope, the question is what is good, what is best, what is most equitable before the law. All of these things that we would view as virtuous are hopefully the questions going into mind, whether it's a bill about abortion, something that seems blatantly a moral issue, or whether to put a new interstate exchange off the freeway, and you're thinking, how is this going to affect the people who live there? How is this going to affect the wildlife or the environment? If it's an undeveloped area, how is this going to affect traffic? All of these things, and you're trying to deliberate what is best. The question of what is best has a moral component. So, that's a silly attack that's used mainly to try to silence people right of center who are often more upfront about, Jeremy and I were talking about this yesterday, who are often more upfront about their beliefs in truth and morality, though people on the left are also putting forth their conception of truth and morality in everything that they do. So, America is a pluralistic society. That's the point. We have competing visions of what is good. Let the best argument win, right? But let's not be ashamed of the fact that we're trying to do what is best. Okay, now what's your ultimate goal? Third, so what's your ultimate goal? Because, gosh, this is going to be important. Are you in search, ultimately, of truth or political victory? Are you in search of truth or political victory? When you engage in the political environment, there are two very different ways to do so. If you're truth conscious, you will be relieved to realize that reality exists independent of what you feel or prefer. So the goal of my political efforts should be to move us closer to what is true. However, if the goal is merely scoring political victories, if the goal is merely to score political victories, then you may no longer be attached to a fixed, transcendent concept of what is true. You might be tempted to move your goalposts, right? Our calling is to conform ourselves to what is true. But if we're trying to rationalize why we need a win on this, we can very much move those goalposts and lose sight of that end goal to what is immediately expedient. So, keep your true north. That's what the compass is supposed to indicate to you. Your true north. Political victories are good. I love winning. Even before Donald Trump talked about winning and all that, I like to win, right? Like my wife teases me when we play like board games or something with people. We very rarely do this anymore because of COVID or just my attention span, one of the two. But I like to win. I'm very competitive. Are some of you competitive? Yeah. So if you're competitive, you get it. If you're not competitive, you're like, yeah, you people are really weird. Like you get so into this. Like just enjoy the game. Well, yeah, I enjoy it if I win. No. So winning is great, but it's not ultimate. So I'm not saying you don't want to win. Yes, that's in the words of a famous NFL, or there was an NFL football coach, Herman Edwards. Some of you know this, of the New York Jets. The side note is my grandfather was actually his high school guidance counselor in Monterey, California. But Herman Edwards is famous for this clip that they took of him because a reporter asked him after they lost if he was going to take any moral victories from this loss in the playoffs. And he said, no, you play to win the game. And it's just like, you play to win the game. And then he just looks like incredulous. But winning is good, it's not ultimate. So if you keep the ultimate in mind, if winning happens, great. But look, as a Christian, I know that God has called me to obedience, not to outcome. There are very few things in life or in sports in which we control the outcome, right? Our calling is to be faithful and trust that there are going to be positive and negative outcomes. In our mind, we're going to say they're positive and negative. Who knows what will they be in the future? Look, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Israelites they were basically like legislative aides in Congress. It was just the Babylonian Empire, right? And there's a thing that they're asked to do by the king that they can't do, right? Which is to worship an idol. These are faithful Jews who believe in the God of the Bible and say, we cannot worship. There should be no other gods before me. They say, we can't bow down to this, right? If you know the story, he throws them in the fiery furnace, right? But they don't burn, right? It's incredible, true, and you see that. But it would have been really easy for them. They're in politics. They're advising this king. They have a role of influence. It would have been easy for them to say, this is an extreme example. Hopefully, none of you will be faced with death or, obeying what you believe is something causing you to go against your faith in this country. We've been blessed with that reality. Some in the world have not been blessed with that even now. However, so it's a bit of an extreme example, but I hope you can follow the point, which is that they could have easily said, okay, we're in this position of influence in the biggest empire in the Near East right now, and, what if we bow and we don't really mean it? Like, we'll just act like we do. We'll go, because, let's, live to fight another day. Like, maybe if we can put our heads down during this battle, we'll have another moment, and we'll be useful, right? But they realize, this is the hill to die on, right? So, that's a prudential wisdom thing of the hill to die on that you're going to deal with. But when it's like that, they knew there was no prudential wisdom. It was very morally clear. But truth or political victory. It's always, my only point, sorry, I got a little off topic on that, but the only point with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is that that's an extreme example to show, though, that you would always have the ability to reason, to fight another day, right? Or, what if I just go along here? But at a certain point, there's a point, and you've got to set that in your heart where that is. Look, Bonhoeffer, I talked about the Bonhoeffer biography, right? Let's fast forward about 3,000 years from those guys to 1930s and 40s Germany. And there are those, people in Germany. Some of you have seen the Google image of the crowd of thousands at the Hitler Youth Rally, and the one guy who's not putting his hand up, right? And it says, be this guy, right? But German citizens faced these decisions, right? People throughout Europe faced this decision of, okay, at what point do I At what point do I have to stand firm? Now, with Wilberforce, though, the abolitionist movement made him lose a lot of popularity amongst his peers. Okay, it really made him lose a lot of popularity and opportunities in London high society. For him, it was worth the cost, right, to do what was right. Okay, figure out what you believe. The next principle is to figure out what you believe and to communicate it well and graciously. We've got a quote up there from President Reagan, and I like this quote because it kind of epitomizes his style of communication, his outlook on that. Reagan was known as the great communicator, right? And he was known for his ability to disarm opponents with humor, kindness, wit, and all these things in a great way. He was an optimistic, positive vision caster, right? Who even his opponents, he frustrated them to no end because he could communicate in such a forward-looking way, right? He said after his farewell address that he hoped that he had appealed to their greatest hopes and aspirations, not their most basic fears. But you want to figure out what you believe and how to communicate it well and graciously. So know your creed, right? Know your creed. What's a creed? Not like Creed from The Office, but what's a creed? Yeah, it's like a code. It's like your essential beliefs, right? When there are a lot more civic organizations in American society, they have kind of their, it's like your core beliefs, right? So know what you believe and how to communicate it well and graciously. Colossians, in the New Testament, Colossians says, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Jesus Christ came in the fullness of grace and truth, right? So the fullness of grace and truth. And that should be we're not going to emulate that perfectly. Trust me. We're going to fail on one or both of those ends sometimes to exemplify truth and grace. However, that's our goal. 1 Peter 3:15 and 16, the two verses back to back, describe this perfectly. 1 Peter 3:15 says, but in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. So be prepared to answer, right? Be prepared to know what's what. Fear God. Don't fear man. Stand by your convictions. Have the courage to speak truth. Now, let's look at the next verse. Yet, do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. So, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone that asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you, truth. Do it with gentleness, yet do it at the same time with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience so that when you're slandered, they'll be put to shame. So you've heard that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's a cliche. Cliches are based in truth. Many times this is true, right? 2 Timothy, one more verse for you. 2 Timothy 2:23 says, have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels, and the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to knowledge of truth. So, don't be a jerk. That's the summary of this point. Don't be a jerk. You can be savage or whatever, but don't be a jerk. It's not how to win. It's not in the famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Life, guys, truth bomb. Life is about more than owning the libs on Twitter. Yeah, I know, right? Churchill is often ascribed many quotes, right? It's like Churchill or Abraham Lincoln. Like everybody who wants to have a truism, they ascribe it to one of those two, and then you look and it's not actually said by them. And it's almost as disappointing to me as when I realized Remember the Titans wasn't fully historically accurate, which is devastating. I learned that a year ago. So I lived this wonderful 20 years of thinking it was all historically accurate. And anyway, I know. But Churchill's often ascribed these quotes. One quote to whom he's ascribed, but actually it sounds like it was written by Victor Hugo, who's actually the author of Les Miserables, the amazing book novel that you've seen as a musical or movie, hopefully read as well. This is a long intro to give you a quote, isn't it? It was either Churchill or Hugo who said, "You have enemies, good. That means at some point you stood for something in your life." That could be true, but we don't want to make the enemies based on our behavior and our treatment of other people. If what we stand for offends, so be it. But we don't want to bring the offense, right? By being a jerk. You will meet some people in conservative politics who think that they are the suffering martyr who are actually just jerks. Right? And you will, I'm just going to lay it on the table. Sometimes the person with the martyr complex isn't actually a martyr. The rest of us just, sometimes, are looked at this thinking, it's actually that you try so hard to be unlikable. Right? It's so do not be owned by people pleasing, right? Fear God, not man. Don't need to people please, but treat people kindly and with respect. And even as you clash in public, or even as that, you would hope that at the end of the day, you could have that type of respect that Scalia and Ginsburg have for each other. Or you've heard this friendship. They would go, with their spouses and watch plays and stuff like this. And it bothers people in our partisan context that would be the case. But they respected each other's brilliance, wit, poetry, humor. Far different, right? She probably thinks he's a right-wing nut job, and he probably thought, she was this left-wing wacko. But they respected each other, and that you can respect people and love people while massively disagreeing with them. So please, aspire to more than owning the libs on Twitter. Savage, don't be a jerk. Temptation. Next point. Your moral weaknesses will find you out. Guys, this is harsh. Also, got serious. Your moral weaknesses will find you out. Sin is deceitful, right? Sin is deceitful above all else. It will blind you. So, question for you. If you enter public life, or if you enter politics, or any of these endeavors, do you think that the things that you struggle with are going to be, the temperature is going to be turned up or turned down? Yeah, why is it so obvious? Anybody want to venture a guess? Yeah.
Because it basically takes your life and it puts it in a magnifying glass, either on TV or just into the TV.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, great point. Yeah. Chris.
I mean, when you're fighting for truth, the enemy wants something more to take down.
Yeah, you're more of a threat. Yeah, to them. Yeah, exactly. And you're around more temptation, right? You're around more temptation. You're around power. There's power. There's prestige. There's all these things that the hearts of men and women have sought after, right? What is in The Hobbit? Thor and oak and shield, right? Was he Dwarf King or something? Anyway, he's bigger than the Hobbit. The Hobbit, he tells Bilbo Baggins, if more men loved, because he's the gold, gets to him, right? This temptation for gold. He becomes somebody he doesn't want to be, all this. And he tells Bilbo Baggins, who he has looked down upon the whole time, basically, even as he's part of his cohort, right? He says, if more men loved home more than gold, the world would be a good place, right? Because Bilbo's just in the Shire. Yeah, I'm sure he's got temptations, but now the gold and all these things, and it's bringing out the worst temptations of mankind. So you're going to have more temptations. So it would be silly to think that our temptations would be tamped down by entering this. So your moral weaknesses, the things you struggle with, will be amplified, or they're not going to go away. So deal with it now. Deal with it swiftly. In the darkest hour, some of you have seen this, hopefully. Yeah, your two biopic recommendations about British statesmen are Amazing Grace and The Darkest Hour. Winston Churchill, in the darkest hour, played by Gary Oldman, has this moment, symbolized by this picture, when they're in the bunker, they're in that kind of that basement, the war room, and they're trying to, some of the members of his cabinet are telling him that he needs to sue for peace with Hitler. This is after they've evacuated Normandy and everything, or not Normandy, after they've evacuated Dunkirk and everything, and its hope is small guys and everything, and they say, oh, you should negotiate with Hitler. And Churchill's like, Churchill doesn't believe you can negotiate with this, this evil tyrant, but he says too, he's been warning people about Hitler for 15 years. He's not the guy who wants to negotiate with Hitler. He doesn't see Hitler as passing the basic muster of someone you can, in good conscience, negotiate with, even in realpolitik. But he also realizes, we're like on the brink of losing disaster. This is not the time you like negotiate. What odds or what proposal do you think you're going to get at this point, right? So he says, you can't reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth. That's not the time. It's too late. So deal with your sin, deal with these things now, before the moment of pressure. There's a great, some of you have read C.S. Lewis, and there's a great example in there. There's a great example in there of dealing with temptation. In the book, yes, one clarifying question. In the book, The Great Divorce, which is kind of his deliberation of what happens when people die in the afterlife. It's a novel. There's an example of this person who has this like red reptile on their shoulder, and the red reptile is annoying. It's this besetting sin. It's probably just idiot. So this character tells the angel, "Can you kill this thing? Can you deal with this? It's bothering me. This red reptile that's on my shoulder just keeps bothering me." The angel flips out a flaming sword and says, "Yeah, I'll deal with it right now." And he says, "Oh, a sword? That seems like overkill. That seems harsh. It's not that bad, actually." He starts reasoning with it, right? And the angel just says, "Nope, I must kill now." And so guys, deal with it now. Scripture, 2 Timothy 2 says, "Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself or herself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. So, flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart." It says, so what's the main point at the start? Cleanse yourself from what is dishonorable so that you're, of good use, good service. And how do you do so? By fleeing youthful passions and going the opposite direction, pursuing righteousness, faith, and love with those who call from a pure heart. Right? So this ties in to friends along the journey. Right? So in Wilberforce's life, I promised some more examples from Wilberforce. In Wilberforce's life, this is the Clapham Circle. Does anybody know what the Clapham Circle was? Bonus points if you knew the Clapham Circle. Yeah. Yes, Becca.
Okay, this might kind of butcher it, but I know that it's from, is it the region of Clapham? And Hannah Moore was from Clapham.
Yeah.
There was like a group of advisors that helped Wilberforce.
Exactly. Clapham, yes, this neighborhood, this community in London that Hannah Moore, William Wilberforce, and other believers in different professions who are all kind of caring about the same things of reforming London and British society and motivated by the Christian faith, decide to kind of live in this whole neighborhood and do life in the city of London together. They become super well known for the impact of this small group of people, these friendships. So incredible that Wilberforce and Hannah Moore and others saw the need for intentional communities. And so they and their families kind of lived in the same neighborhoods basically, or different neighborhoods, and loved those neighborhoods really well and really intentionally. But they had those friends along the journey to hold them accountable, but to also hold them up, to also lift their arms up. Wilberforce, the slave trade, the fight against the slave trade, cost him his health. Right? He died of ulcers that were created by the stress of fighting this over 30 or 40 years. He had wicked betrayals, guys. One time he had the votes to end the slave trade, to abolish the slave trade. And 7 of the members who were going to vote to abolish the slave trade after 20 years of fighting took free tickets to the horse races and went and did that instead of voting. It wouldn't be passed for another decade. Can you imagine the devastation or being that distraught or being that disillusioned? Right? I mean, talk about that. So Wilberforce has these friends along the journey, right? Having people with accountability, who will hold you accountable, who care to ask you about your motives, partners in arms, right? These partners in life who love you enough to care more about you and more about the principles and the beliefs that you guys share than any material success, accolades that any of you might achieve. These friends are indispensable, and we hope that these friends will be a huge part of what you gain from Forge. Justin and I started Forge really as simply a way to multiply these types of friendships that had forged our friendship in life and others. So Forge was a way to try to multiply those same crucial friendships in our life. Now, friends are wonderful. Friends who are going through the same battles and same fires with you are wonderful, but you need to have people who have been through those fires already. Like Mr. Miyagi. So, you guys know who these people are, or these characters are. Okay, thankfully. Okay. I found this, I liked it. All right, so a common thread among successful leaders is the recognition that they should always be growing and that they should surround themselves with trusted friends to hold them accountable. They also realize they need mentors, that there are wise and experienced people out there, and that there is wisdom in experience. The Christian term for mentorship in faith is discipleship, right? Christ had disciples. He invested the large majority of time in his life in 12 guys, right? 2 Timothy 2:2, you see Paul, the Apostle Paul, talking to Timothy, who he's mentored, who's younger than him. He says, Timothy, what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So, Paul's talking to Timothy. What Paul's taught Timothy, he says to teach to other faithful men. And then those faithful men will be able to teach others also. There's 4 generations represented. There's like 4 mentorship generations represented in that one verse. It's pretty incredible. Think of all the men and women. Think if each of you had a couple people that you mentored, and then they each had a couple people that they mentored, and then they had a couple people that they mentored. That's like a multiplication table, right? There's that great scene of the greatest, comedy show of all time, The Office, where Michael gets in front of everybody and says, "Guys, who wants to get rich?" Quick. And it sounds like a get rich quick scheme. He's, exactly, you will get rich quick. And he says, "Michael, this sounds like and the guy says, well, I've got this calling card, and if you get each of you get a couple people to make these calls, and they get a couple people to make these calls, it'll be great." And he draws one, and Jim says, "This is a pyramid scheme." Michael goes, no. And sure enough, he goes, "No, it's just my friend Jeff told me, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and then we tell all these people, and then they tell all these people." And Jim goes up and traces the pyramid. Michael goes, "I gotta make a call." No, but multiplication works. This is a multiplication. This is not a pyramid scheme. If it is, it's a good one. Look, discipleship and mentorship is the multiplication of relationships that matter and that make all the difference in your life. So, mentorship is really, let's demystify the word discipleship or just the word mentorship. It's just friendship with a vision. Guys, it's just friendship with a vision. So how do you find a mentor? Because you need people to walk through the battles with you, but you also need somebody who's been through those already, right? So for qualifications, in finding a mentor, look to someone who you admire. Is there someone in your life or your church or your different groups, whose character you admire, whose communities, who's standing in the community you admire, whose marriage you admire, whose parenting you admire. All of these things are qualities of someone to look to as a mentor. Look at their professional or personal reputation. Are they respected for their integrity, character, and humility? If they meet the criteria, look at their family, right? Do you look at them and think, man, I really want to be the type of husband, the type of father that one of my mentors is named John, that John is. Man, wonder what he's learned, that could help me along that same pursuit. So, Wilberforce had this, guys. Wilberforce had this in John Newton. We talked about John Newton earlier. There's an author who said, this is a quote, without William Wilberforce, there would have been no successful campaign in the 18th and 19th century for the abolition of the slave trade in England. But without John Newton, William Wilberforce would not have been engaged in such a role. For it was Newton who, in 1785, persuaded the young member of Parliament not to give up his career in politics in order to enter ministry. It was Newton whose experiences as a former slave ship captain provided Wilberforce with the authentic information he used to such devastating effect in attacking the slave trade. Above all, it was the bonding with Newton that gave Wilberforce the powerful combination of political motivation driven by conviction that inspired his abolitionist campaign and enabled him to persevere through many years of defeats and disappointments. Against this background, it is clear that the relationship between Newton and Wilberforce was of pivotal importance for both historical and spiritual reasons. Yet John Newton's contribution to the life of William Wilberforce as a mentor, confidant, co-campaigner, and close friend has often been underestimated but should never be overlooked. So, look at the value of a mentor. Look at what a mentor can do. So, find mentors, seek out mentors. Look, if you ask somebody to be a mentor, say, hey, can we get breakfast once a month or every other month or something? We have a phone call. The worst thing they're going to say is they don't have time. But they're going to be honored. If you to be asked to be a mentor is one of the greatest compliments because it means you think of them as somebody worthy of being a mentor. Who's not going to be blown away and honored by that? So, as worst case, if you know somebody in your life, in your networks who's like that, ask them. Obviously, that's a huge part. Hopefully, or you will know in a couple of days. It's a huge part of the Forge Mentorship Academy is that the time, energy we spend endless hours trying to match you with the ideal mentor for your convictions and where you're going professionally. So that's it. This is it. You know what you believe, why you believe it, know why you want to engage, communicate well, know what you believe and how to communicate both truth and grace. Have friends along the journey who can help you flee temptation and have mentors who have gone through those fires ahead of time. We will have time for questions. We'll save if you have questions on Slido, we can save those for later in the week. I'll have some time we don't have time now, right, Jeremiah?
Right.
But we'll have some time when Justin and I debrief with you where you can ask me some questions related to this talk, or you can grab me throughout the day. So thank you, guys.